My history is that, as well as being an academic ecologist, I've spent probably 30 plus years working either in industry or in local government as an ecological advisor. And it was particularly in my time working at Dorset County Council for nigh on 25 years that I don't know, I mean, there are lots of opportunities to create habitats, but I think of the one thing that really got up my goat was the pathetic management of green spaces that were within urban areas that just didn't seem to reflect the obvious trends that were happening in our wildlife in this country, and just to see the constant mowing of grass just really did it for me. And I think I just got increasingly frustrated by that. And then, happen chance, 4 years before I left the county council, I was promoted and put in charge of road verge management within the county council. So that gave me just about £1 million budget and staff and contracts. And for the first time ever, you put an ecologist in charge of an enormous area of green space management. Whoopee. And so part of what I'm going to describe to you this afternoon is the changes that have happened since that time, because I've now left the county council. I'm now at Butterfly Conservation, loving it there, because I'm out promoting the changes that I was able to effect within the county council in Dorset, and I'm promoting that nationally now. And here's the sort of information that I'm going to be talking to you this afternoon, putting into practice the very, very simple, well, they are at least in theory simple mechanisms to be able to improve our urban habitats for wildlife. And you can immediately see, therefore, the crossover with big city butterflies. So here we go. My talk. I'm about to share my screen, and it is, let's just see that we can see that. If somebody could, I can't now see anybody, so I will need somebody just to unmute and say, I can now see the screen.
I can see the screen.
Wonderful.
I can see the screen.
Thank you very much indeed. Great. So making the best of the built environment for butterflies and moths. Now, leading question this, which would people prefer? The following, this view here in the screen, or this view? It's pretty obvious, isn't it, really? These are both managed pieces of green space. In the first example, it is gang mown regularly every year, and with the decreases in budgets with local authorities, then gang mowing is a little less often, and so you end up with these massive clods of rotting grey, brown grass all over the place. It effectively makes the green spaces pretty unusable for the period, and it contributes absolutely nothing to wildlife conservation. In this picture you're seeing here this was very much a gang mown piece of green space within urban Weymouth, and we transformed it. It wasn't very hard, and I will tell you how we did it. But what is really important is that we understand these days that our green spaces are not just about neat mown grass. We actually want a whole lot more from them. So we expect our green spaces to help out with flooding, with biodiversity, with climate change, with air quality, but we also expect them to create a sense of place. And that's very much, from a wildlife and a wildflower point of view, about the local species that live in that area. And another frustration of mine is that every time you turn up to a supermarket, it's the same flipping trees and shrubs that are planted all over the country. And that frustrates me, is that there's nothing local about them. Indeed, these tend to be species that aren't even native. So there's not a hope of a white letter hairstreak being able to thrive in a supermarket car park because nobody's planted any disease-resistant elm. Now, I know some people will already have started that, but that's the mission I'm on, is to get people to see some simple changes that they can make to the design and the management of green spaces to start building those ecosystem services that green spaces can provide, some of which are on this slide. Now, here's how we normally create our green spaces, so our grasslands, is that whenever they're designed, traditionally, I don't know, for the last 40, 50 years, whatever the material is that was beneath the grass and the rest of it, it has a good layer of topsoil put on it. We've become obsessed with this stuff, and it's time to unleash ourselves from topsoil. And we tended to put on 150 mil of topsoil onto a subsoil or a mineral base, and then we sow it with amenity grass. And part of the reason for doing that is because the day the road opens, the school opens, the community park opens, the mayor or whoever it is, a dignitary, comes along to cut the ribbon and everything's looking neat and tidy and green and pleasant. And that's great, but somebody has to look after it forever and a day afterwards. And you can see in the right-hand picture here in the center, just the amount of mowing that we do in this country. I estimated the amount of green space management, mowing that goes on across the UK to be somewhere in the region of £500 million that we're spending on just mowing grass every year. Now, I don't know about you, but I think we could probably do something more useful with that money. And why I'm obsessed about topsoil is because soil fertility is actually a really powerful driver of grass growth. So if you look at the picture on the left and you look at the one on the right and compare them, this is a same piece of road verge, not far from me down in Weymouth, that was designed by my then engineering colleagues, and it had its normal specification of 150 mil of topsoil. And on the left, that's what they put down. And on the right, they'd kind of run out and didn't order any in, and so left it as subsoil, spread the same. So that's subsoil, that's no topsoil at all, and just spread the same amenity grass seed and then left it. Now on the left, this is mid-April, that grass now needs management, and that has to be mown in order to maintain the safety of the highway. So its function as green space means that it has to be cut. And on the right, on the subsoil, this low fertility material, it doesn't need cutting at all. These photos taken on the same day. And what you also notice, flip back to the left, 2 dandelions and a daisy that you can see probably. And on the right, loads of daisies and some dandelions and celandines. And if you got down on your hands and knees, you'd see a whole load of other common wildflower species in the turf. And that tells you pretty much everything you need to know about what drives biodiversity in amenity grassland. Is that where you've got low fertility, you get lots of fine grasses and herbs, and there are plenty of gaps for germination. Where you've got thick topsoil, you get coarse grasses, you get very few gaps for germination, and those coarse grasses dominate and smother the rest of the vegetation. If only we could understand that in our everyday lives. And part of my Building Sites for Butterflies program advice is to teach people how to do it. So that's the great thing about this biodiversity, is that our grasslands, if we want high biodiversity grasslands, we want low fertility, because in nature, our best grasslands for wildflowers, bees, butterflies, whatever it is, they develop on the poorest soil. So if we cherish our chalk and limestone grasslands, we cherish our sand dunes, and some of our neutral grasslands. Well, in fact, over in Hertfordshire, and not that far from Breck Sands, with that amazing complexity of thin kind of calcareous and loamy soils. Wonderful, wonderful biodiversity out there, all based on low nutrient soils. And that's because our wildflowers are adapted to tolerate very low levels of nutrients. And in doing so, they scavenge for what they can, and that means lots of species can survive with each other. So that's the system. If we want to build biodiversity into our urban environments, in our grasslands, that's what we've got to do. Lower the fertility, so stop putting topsoil on there. My biggest experiment with not putting topsoil on anything was back in 2009 to 2011, when I was as part of the project team on the construction of the Weymouth Relief Road, which was built just prior to the London Olympics, and where Weymouth held the sailing events, which you may or may not remember. And those road verges, I was able to specify a fraction of the amount of topsoil on quite a lot of them and no topsoil whatsoever on quite a lot of the rest of the verges. So across 7 hectares, they either had a thin scattering of soil or subsoil only. So that was clays or limestones or sands, whatever it was. I said, do not put any topsoil anywhere near it. Not only that, I then included a seed mix, basic chalk grassland seed mix. Now, whether that was clays, neutral clays, or alkaline chalk, I didn't really mind. Just put the wildflowers on there and let nature take its course. But what I did do is to include one pioneer species in there. And for those keenies amongst you who will have already seen what that pioneer species is, it's kidney vetch, of course. And why are we all interested in kidney vetch? I don't need to talk to you about that. Kidney vetch being the sole food plant for the small blue. And as a pioneer species, it loves germinating and flourishing and thriving on bare ground. And it looks absolutely spectacular. So I think we ought to be putting kidney vetch into virtually every seed mix that is sown all across the country, to be honest, because small blue's in a bit of a state, although I'm doing my bit to try and turn it round, and it should be a common and widespread species across the country. But it isn't, because we are doing our damnedest either in an agricultural environment or in an urban environment to try and stop kidney vetch from spreading as a plant. So we need to reverse that, and that's partly what I'm trying to do. Now, just in terms of where are we now with small blue on the Weymouth Relief Road across those 7 hectares? Well, actually not. I think these figures in front of you just cover about the counts across 2 hectares of the slopes of the verges. So the butterfly was first recorded back in 2012, so literally 6 months after the road opened and probably 18 months after the first seed was sown. So a pioneer plant comes into flower very quickly, and even though small blue, the nearest colony we're aware of, was about 4 miles away, it only took this wee critter 18 months to get there. So some of us think of small blue as perhaps a rather delicate butterfly, doesn't really fly very far. I kind of think that it's perfectly capable of getting around the environment. So if we can produce habitats with lots of kidney vetch on them, we're almost certain to produce habitat for small blue. Look at the numbers, they're doing very well. 2019 was an exceptional year across much of southern England. I don't know about the Hertfordshire area for small blue, but it was certainly very good in most of southern England, certainly in Surrey and all the way through Hampshire and into Dorset. So those numbers have been steadily growing over the years. Quite when they will plateau, we don't know, but it's amazing to go out there. And there are, you can see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of small blue on these verges. It's an amazing sight, particularly to go out in late afternoon or early evening when the butterflies are roosting on some of the taller grasses. There are dozens jostling for position on the grasses. It's almost tear-jerking to see the numbers of small blue that are coming in. And I hope that gives you all good heart for what's going on in Greenwood Park. Nice to hear the little update from Malcolm earlier that now at least you've got the rabbit fence round there, that the plants are doing rather better. And I would imagine, given firstly you'll be allowed out this spring to go and have a look, that I would thought it was very likely that if you haven't already, that you will be seeing small blue on there this year, and that will probably be the start of their survival there for, I don't know, with pretty minimal interference for the next 15 or 20 years. I mean, remarkable, and well done you for getting that done, and well done to all the volunteers who've worked so hard to create that habitat. And I look forward to coming up and seeing it this spring too. So back to the Weymouth Relief Road, lots of blues on there. Is it 6 species of blue? We've already had small blue, and then there are 4 more on this slide, and the majority in flower in this picture is obviously horseshoe vetch. Adonis blue moved in very quickly in 2013, and numbers have been fluctuating but were exceptionally high last year. Chalk hill blue, it's not doing well in Dorset as a butterfly. numbers have collapsed dramatically, except on Portland, which you can just see in the far distance in this shot, and that's 11 miles away. But Chalk Hill Blue did arrive in 2018 and has been seen each year in very low numbers, and was seen in 2019 on Transect. And we're hopeful that the numbers will start to build. But if it does build, then that's a very interesting point, is that despite the collapse in Chalk Hill Blue numbers across most of the inland sites in Dorset, virtually all of the inland sites in Dorset, if we can see that the butterfly can colonize and increase on created sites, then that should give us hope that actually what we need to be doing is to creating many more habitats with on chalk with horseshoe vetch for this species. But it's very pleasing to see so many butterflies around on this site. Now, here's a bit that's not on chalk. This is on the series known as the Portland Sand series, which is a kind of muddy clays, sort of very fine silty clays. They are rather calcareous, but this was a view last summer, and an absolute stunning picture of pyramidal orchid. And the year before it was a mix of pyramidal orchids and bee orchids. So it's not just the butterflies, but you can create some stunning environments for wildlife if you just stop putting topsoil on something. And also in this picture, the last person to stand on that road verge, other than me photographing it, was me sowing the seed. Nobody's done anything to that verge since. It's not had one single mower anywhere near it. It doesn't need it. It still performs its main function, which is to be open ground in the highway to improve visibility, and it's maintaining the stability of the ground, and it's costing the authority nothing to do it. And that is a really important message, is that actually when you increase the biodiversity by lowering the fertility, you reduce the maintenance burden, and that's very important. But back to the wildlife. 141 species of plant when we last counted in 2019 across the 7 hectares, and we are leveling off at 30 species of butterfly that have been recorded on the slopes in the last 10 years. And as you will know, there are 59 or maybe now 60 species of breeding butterfly in Britain. That's nigh on half the species of breeding butterfly in Britain have been found in the last 10 years on the Weymouth Relief Road. I think that should all give us great hope that biodiversity is not a lost cause. We have it in our gift to be able to do, each in their own ability, to be able to create habitats for butterflies, whether that's in a garden, in a park, as part of a major scheme. But providing we get the basic specifications right, nature will follow on. And that's my motto, really, is if you build it, they will come. And so here's the overall numbers of butterflies since 2012, which is when the good Dorset band of volunteers started recording. The numbers, basically, if you look at the trend, the blue line for the total count per year, by and large, that's still heading up. So the total number of butterflies as the habitat starts to mature, and I reckon it's still got another 30, 40, maybe 50 years before it starts looking like chalk downland. But as it starts to mature, I would guess the numbers will level off somewhere. But at the moment, the numbers on balance over the years, subject to some fluctuations, just seem to be heading up. Numbers of species, we've plateaued at 30. I'm not going to list them, but we're missing grayling, green hair streak. I think would be a couple that might venture forth and establish. But maybe we've got to as many as we're going to get. We haven't got a total list of a full list of chalk grassland plants, and I think species, as the scrub starts to emerge in the next 10 years or so, I think more species will arrive when there's a little bit more shelter. Dark green frit, for instance, that's not there. Well, there's hardly any any dog violet there at the moment, but I guess it will come in and maybe somebody will introduce it at some point, the plant, so who knows. But 30, maybe it'll get up to 36 species in another 10 years or so, but fantastic. Now, just as an aside, I've mentioned already the amount of mowing that is not done on the Weymouth Relief Road, and I've been working with Dr. Sarah Wynne from ADAS, because most organisations and certainly local government and national government are very interested in greenhouse gas emissions. And we are all desperately trying to work our way towards net zero by particular timelines, and that means simply not using as much fuel to do the sorts of things which we regularly do. This low topsoil specification that I advocate now nationally is something that definitely helps organizations reduce the amount of fuel they use in either creating green spaces or after that looking after them. So if you look at the bar chart on the far right, that very low pale blue bar is the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions used in creating that stunning butterfly habitat you've just had a look at. If you look on the left bar, the tall bar, the dark blue shows you the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are used in hauling the topsoil and smearing it over the slopes during the construction. And then the pale blue is the amount of greenhouse gas emissions used in mowing it twice a year, which is pretty much the standard maintenance for, say, an urban dual carriageway or an urban fast road. If you were out on a motorway, then that might be mown at once every 3 to 5 years, and that's the middle bar in the bar chart. But basically, the difference between the low topsoil specification on the right and the standard maximum amount of mowing that you do on the left is a reduction of 97% in greenhouse gas emissions. Frankly, this is a no-brainer, and I'll come on to who's already kind of caught this hook, line and sinker in a bit, but this is something we absolutely have to do. Basically, we only want to put topsoil where we want mown grass for playing fields, for hard-wearing grasses. The rest of it, frankly, should be low fertility to include wildflowers, so we increase wildlife. So we've got an awful lot of green spaces that we've already committed to 150 mil of topsoil, and we keep having to mow them. Is there any way we can lower that fertility on existing amenity grasslands? And of course there is. And what I did when I was put in charge of the green space services was to change the way that the grasses are mown from cut and drop mowers to cut and collect mowers. So those are mowers that pick up the grass as they're going along. And you will all have seen many places, and indeed some of you will be doing it in your garden. You will be cutting the grass and not picking up the clippings. The principle here is that the nutrients that grasses need to grow are coming from the soil beneath. And that happens in the spring and the summer. And if you allow the grass to grow really long in the spring before you do your first cut, you are sucking the nutrients out of the soil. And a lot of nutrients will come out of the soil into the green grass blades and the flowers and the seeds. And if you then take them away, they can't go back into the soil. And therefore, it's almost miraculous, but you're taking away that fertility. And as a result of that, the change can be remarkably quick. And indeed, you can probably reduce the amount of certainly mowing done in municipal areas by about half in a couple of years. And the great thing about that is that once the wildflowers are established, if you're not cutting as much, they can flower and set seed between the cuts. So here's the specification that I prefer, having tried it out with my stuff, is that if you're going to go into a new road verge or a public park, or indeed in bits of your garden where you've been just doing cutting and drop mowing, is you need to go in there and go in there a bit harsh for the first year. Reduce that fertility with 3 cut and collects during the first year. And in southern Britain, and certainly up as far as Hertfordshire, I would suggest sometime in April July and September to do that cutting. And when you've done that, so let the grass get as long as you can before your mower can't cope, then go and take it away. And the following year, you've depleted the nutrient levels in the soil so much that actually you will instantly see that the coarse grasses have declined, the fine grasses, so your fescues and your bents, agrostis, they have come in, and instantly you can see, and even in this picture here, this is mid-May for a verge that would normally be cut at the beginning of April. No need to cut. It's doing beautifully, and it's full of daisies. So you've already started that process by which common wildflowers can self-establish in these verges or in parks. And it's just a very simple change in the way that we deal with the management of the grassland. And just a few examples now, just so you know that this system actually does work. So this is a verge in Blandford. So in the town in Blandford, just an ordinary verge, nowhere in special. And that was last cut in mid-June, late June, and this photograph was taken in October. So here's a very neat, tidy verge that simply hasn't required mowing for several months. And that, of course, means that you see a few yarrows. Biodiversity takes a while to get back in, but even those yarrows will be providing some nectar for invertebrates in the meantime during the time when it's not being mown. And that's a big, big change for our pollinators and for our butterflies and moths within urban environments. Here's one in my own town in Weymouth. So this is after 4 years of cut and collect. Now this is rough hawksbeard that's mainly in abundance here in May, but also lots of oxeye daisy and ordinary daisies and dandelions. There's so little grass left in this verge now, it's almost all wildflowers. Well, isn't that what we want? So from a safety point of view, this presents no problems. And from a nectar point of view, this is an abundant nectar bar now for any bees and the rest of it. So it's a very simple transformation that is now in progress throughout virtually all the major towns in Dorset, apart from Dorchester and Sherborne, but we're working on it. And after 5 years, so here's a Chalky Bypass. So this is around Blandford, the A354 for anybody who comes down that way into Dorset. This site's now been under a cut and collect regime for 5 years, and so full of wildflowers, and indeed loads and loads of marble whites and common blues and narrow-bordered five-spot burnet moths, so full of wildflowers that the Dorset Wildlife Trust have now declared this as a county wildlife site. When I took on the management of this site as the service manager, the mowing regime was 3 times a year. It is now 1 cut and collect a year. That's it. So we've instantly saved a load of cash and delivered a lot of biodiversity. And now looking at back to that first slide that I showed you, of which you would prefer, here's a created site. So this was gang mown grassland. The grassland had been created. You see lots of this in new urban development where you've got aprons, little triangles and circles and of grassland that just gets gang mown. We did the 3 cut and collects in the first year, and at the end of that first season sowed a very simple wildflower mix of oxeye daisy, of common knapweed, bird's foot trefoil, and some yellow rattle. And then continued that cut and collect the following year, just once or twice. 18 months later, this is what it was looking like in 2019. And now these areas are just part of the urban fabric. These are mini nature reserves that are providing some widespread, good, but quite good habitat for our more common and widespread species. And now there are plenty of ringlets and gatekeeper and marbled white and all the rest of it breeding in this ground where previously it had been gang mown for about 6 times a year and was just boring grassland. So we really can do this, and we can do this at scale almost anywhere in the country. Excuse me. I often get people saying, yeah, but what about when it comes to municipal lawns? So here's an example, again, not far from me in Weymouth. This was taken last summer in an area where Astor Property, who are now the maintenance company who look after the social housing in Weymouth, and they've swapped on to cut and collect. And where they go cut and collect, of course, they don't need to mow as often, but they're still maintaining a very neat and tidy look to the setting of these social houses. But look at the wildflowers. This is predominantly common bird's foot trefoil in there. And if you go out there in the middle of the summer, there are common blues flying around on the grassland. There are not necessarily lots of them, but they're there and they're breeding there. So even under even maintaining a fairly steady amount of cutting and collecting of 3 times a year, that gives the opportunity for the flowers and for the butterflies to get in there, and even on what looks like a lawn is sufficiently flowery to be able to allow common and widespread species to establish and thrive. And as was mentioned before in the questions about No Mow May, No Mow May is an initiative by Plant Life which is encouraging gardeners not to mow in May and to go and look and count the number of wildflowers that are flowering in their lawns. And I think that's a great initiative, and I think it's an important one. I think we should be going even further than that. And I spend my time trying to persuade people that actually what you need to do is to get in there early in the year. And if the grass is lush by the end of March, go and cut and collect it. Take it away. We don't want lush grass. We want some fine grasses. We're very happy with grass because, let's face it, lots of our butterflies feed on grasses, but we just don't need the amount of grass in the abundance that it is. So go early in the year and take that cut away, and then leave it May to August, and then go and take another cut towards the end of it. And you'll be really surprised at just how many species of butterfly you will see within the garden. And obviously not everybody wants to do that, but I am certainly a massive proponent of encouraging people to do that. So my view is, yeah, No Mow May, yeah, that's fine, but why not No Mow May to August? So there are all sorts of issues with that, and put them in the chat and the rest of it, but disposal of the arisings is the big one. That's more a problem in municipal areas rather than in gardens, but we found solutions for all of these issues in Dorset, and I spend hours discussing that with other local authorities and with national agencies of where to put the arisings, how to do it legally, how to avoid it becoming waste, how to stop fly tipping, all of that sort of thing. But all of those issues are resolvable. There is nothing in principle to stop organisations from cutting and collecting grass to encourage the wildflowers. So things that I think, if we're serious about wanting more insects and we want our butterflies and moths out there, the key do's and don'ts. My view is that we have to reduce soil fertility, and we have to allocate that space for nature. It isn't just, we don't just want little pocket parks for nature. We want to say, right, this whole system, this whole park, or this whole set of road verges is being managed with wildlife in mind. So those things. So it's about reducing soil fertility, and it's about demarking where we're expecting nature to be given a helping hand. The other thing that what I would hope that we can resist doing, if we possibly can, is actually just stop mowing. And that's a common campaign out there, and it's a lack of understanding, in my view, of the ecosystem that we're working with. Is if you encourage your local authority just to stop mowing as much, then the view that you see before you is sometimes what they end up with. Is that, yes, you've got plenty of wildflowers in there. There's lots of creeping thistle, and there's some wild carrot and some yarrow, and there's some ragwort. But present that to the maintenance crews at the end of the year or to the park rangers, and they simply don't know what to do. The kit that they have is not capable of looking after that length of sward. Where on earth do they take all of that dead material at the end of the year? And how are they going to maintain that site in the public interest with the public backing in order to look after it? It's really hard. But if you reduce the fertility, the stuff just doesn't grow as much, and you get the same number or more wildflower species. So it's not just about stopping mowing. You have to get on top of the fertility. And the other thing that I keep banging on about is please, please don't consider planting annual flower mixes as in anything like a substitute for our perennial native wildflowers, because they are not. There is not one single species of butterfly or moth that has anything to do with wild poppy, which we consider to be a native species in this country, but it isn't. It's an archaeophyte. It was introduced here. So even something as fundamental as a poppy that we love to see in the fields offers very little to wildlife other than bumblebees and nectar. So we need to think about our native perennial wildflowers as being far, far more important. However much the Olympic mix, the pictorial meadow mix, was wonderful. It looked spectacular and fantastic, but it was there as a visual spectacle, not as a wildlife haven. And if you go back to the Olympic Park today, you can see what they have done to create now a wildlife haven. They understood the system they were creating. They understood why they were creating that wonderful show. But if you go back now and have a look, you will see native perennial wildflowers that have taken over and are being managed for, and it is simply staggering. So the lot who look after the Olympic Park are to be congratulated in getting this right first time. So well done them. Right, it's really important to have the community on board. You know, we're butterfly and moth nuts. We're out there doing what we can to conserve, and that's great. But actually, there are a whole lot of people there who don't either understand or aren't very willing, and may look at the view in this picture and say, "Gosh, that's a mess." So it's really important to bring people on board. And as you know, within Big City Butterflies and what you've been doing within Brilliant Butterflies project in Croydon and Bromley, is to encourage people to get engaged so they start to understand what it is to look after wildlife in an urban landscape. And that's a really important part of, goes hand in hand with the work that we want to do, is to inform and engage with communities about why we're so passionate about what we are. Just a quickie on budgets. You know, I started off when I took over the service in Dorset with £927,000 to look after road verges in Dorset. This coming year, that budget has now reduced to £501,000. So probably within the next 3 to 4 years, the verge management budget for Dorset will have halved as a result of moving along the line towards reducing fertility across the grassland. On all the verges. I mean, it is a staggering amount of money that has been saved as a result of this change. I didn't know it would be this powerful, but it really is, and I commend it to all local authorities. They just have to do it, because why would you want to waste money where you don't have to, and why would you want to waste money when the consequence of doing something different is to produce biodiversity? Much of this is set out in the Managing Grass and Road Verges Plant Life Guide, and as well as that, there is now a new Good Verge Guide that Plant Life have produced. So if you go onto their website, both those documents are available. But just before I end, I just wanted to give you a little update on Highways England, who are frankly very convinced by my arguments over low fertility soils, and they have now issued what they call a major project instruction on low nutrient grasslands, and that all their big new road schemes that are managed directly by Highways England will no longer have any topsoil associated with them. And like it or not, because I don't suppose any of us will lose any sleep if no more roads are built in this country, but given that they are going to be built, the next 300 miles of grassland on road verges will be based on low fertility soils. And in my view, that's 300 miles of wildflower habitats, which is absolutely stunning. So Highways England are convinced, and it's now very important that we capitalize on this initiative taken by Highways England and roll that out as far as we can. Just a quickie on, you know, we're working in urban environments. Can wildflower grasslands contribute to human health? I think for those of us who are out there doing day-to-day management and monitoring, we recognise the mental health benefits. But it does go beyond that. And one of the things that I'm interested in is in the associations between species diversity and well-being, and whether that can be mediated by what's going on in your internal systems, by your gut microbial ecosystem, your microbiome. And there is at least reasonable circumstantial evidence that your microbiome diversity, which is correlated, the more diverse your microbiome, the less chronic inflammatory disease at a population level that you appear to be associated with. Now, we don't know whether that's a causal link, but my view is if there is anything about biodiversity that can contribute at a population scale to improving human health, then we ought to be putting that into place now. And there are a couple of references at the bottom there which give you the evidence statement. And these are not kind of naughty evidence statements. One of these is produced by DEFRA. This is the evidence statement for links between natural environments and human health. There is ever stronger evidence that we need the more diverse an environment in which we live, the more likely we are to have long and fulfilled lives with less chronic disease. And I think we would all say yes to that. So, conclusions. Well, my view is we need to look at all of our urban grasslands as an ecosystem. And if we think of that system of, well, why does grass grow? How do we stop it growing? Are there any effects of that? If we look at the way we design and manage our amenity grasslands as spaces for wildlife, then we can understand how that ecosystem helps drive the biodiversity that we want. And from my point of view, it's all about low fertility. It basically stops the grass needing such frequent mowing, and wildflowers naturally thrive in it. And therefore, it does deliver the wildlife benefits we want. The greenness of the verges, the parks and the rest of it continue to perform their intended function. People can go out there and sit amongst them or walk on them, or they're safe to travel alongside. They can be neat and tidy without compromising that wildlife value, and they are frankly demonstrably cheaper to look after, and in doing so contribute to reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions, which we all want to see. Okay, thank you very much. That is me done. I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Phil. That's really inspiring talk. We've got some great comments coming through in the comments box. I think I'll open out to questions in a minute, but one of the points people are making is how is just why aren't all councils doing this, and what can we do to encourage councils to do more? I know in our local area that for some time they didn't cut verges, and a lot of people complained about the number of weeds that were growing outside their house. So what can we do to get more councils behaving in the way that we want them to?
Well, I mean that's a very good it's a very good point. It's hard. I think part of it is who runs parks and verge management. Let's take verges, for instance. The majority of local authority staff who look after verges are either highways staff or contractors on behalf of highway staff. We shouldn't be too surprised if they don't really understand the ecosystem that we're trying to work with. I no disrespect to them, but to be honest, most of the response to the grass has grown longer is that we put in bigger and heavier machinery to cut it. So it's about how you respond to the issues that you face. As an ecologist, I look at the ecosystem and say, we need to respond to this ecosystem and work with the grain of nature to help us get to where we want to be, not shove in bigger and heavier and more expensive machinery. So working with local government is partly what I am doing in this project. And please, no better example of I think, some of the enlightened approaches that are being taken than by Buckinghamshire Council. So frankly, next door to Hertfordshire, is it? Yeah, pretty much, isn't it? So Buckinghamshire
Yeah.
Council, this coming year, are changing the way they are going to be managing their verges. They're going to do it as a trial, but they have got their contractor with cut and collect machinery to work on them on some of the A roads, particularly the major approaches to the towns, where they are going to move from cut and drop to cut and collect. They recognise and want, and this is the engineers, this is the highways management lot, recognise that they need to do more for biodiversity. But they absolutely understand the cost savings that they are likely to follow on from this, and also the increase in the safety of the highway, because they are having to, as all local authorities do on high-speed roads, send men and machinery out at night to mow the verges. And that is costly, and it is to some extent risky. And if they can reduce the cost and reduce the risk, then why wouldn't they? So it's basically for me and for others to go out and promote to local government that there is another way. Is that basically, I mean, it's very easy to talk to park rangers and talk to them about an ecosystem. They seem to understand it. And I think we've had some good success already in London. And I kind of know better than London Borough of Lambeth. Brockwell Park is brilliant now, where there are areas set aside under cut and collect for widespread species of butterflies and the rest of it, and people enjoying being in these areas, which are now left a bit longer. That's where they prefer to congregate, because they see wildlife and they're enjoying being amongst it. So it's relatively straight, it's relatively easy, but on the big highways we have a lot of education to do. But that's what I'm doing, and I would say, Cornwall Council are changing, South Gloucestershire Council, Stirling Council in Scotland, St Andrews, so that's Fife Council. They're scattered all around the country. Oh, the latest one, Newcastle City Council, rang me just last week to say, we bought one of these cut and collect machines. We've got 10 trial areas. Can we have a quote for our press release, please? I didn't even know they were doing it. Fantastic. So the message is out there and things are changing, but remember, you've got a historical service that, the easiest thing to do in the world is to issue a contract to mow verges. And because it just gets done automatically. You just pay the bill at the end of the year and nobody fusses. To change that historical pattern takes time. Sometimes contracts are issued for 10 or 15 years. And there are penalty clauses if you change the contract. But slowly and surely, change is happening. And the latest evidence from plant life is that 70% of local authorities are either wanting to change or actively changing now their road verge management regime. Now, I'd like to see the data to see how good that is, but that is, we're on a mission. And I think if you think your local authority in your area isn't doing well enough, then put them in touch with me. That's what I would say.
Well, the people are putting a lot of comments in about their lone local authorities.
Yep.
I mean,
which I will gather.
We do have an awful lot of them in this area, which include about half London boroughs and Hertfordshire County Council and 10 district councils in Hertfordshire. So we've probably got about 22, 23, 24 altogether. How much engagement have you had with those?
Well, fairly recently, so it will be sometime before Christmas. I think it was early December. I spoke to the group known as Park Herts, which are an amalgam. It's a gathering of the local authorities that look after the management of parks and open spaces and some road verges that cover North London over to Suffolk and across to Hertfordshire. Yes, I think there was more than interest in what I had to say, but I have to say, of all the groups that I did speak to, it wasn't one where I got an immediate buy-in. And I just wonder whether there isn't. It's almost as if I mean, am I allowed to say this? Well, let's try and see. Is that I couldn't quite see that the pressure was on those particular local authorities to save money and do the right thing. It almost felt like it was a bit too much hassle to change. I might be wrong, but I've got some local authorities who are constantly in touch with me because they absolutely need to save the money and they recognise the benefits to the wildlife. I just didn't quite get that instant success with Park Herts, but it may be that there are some within the area that are doing the right thing. What I would say is that London Borough Redbridge, they did seem to be on it. Now others may say about Redbridge, there's a particular guy whose name escapes me, somebody or other Castro, who's their park ranger, but he seemed very switched on, and I have to
Well,
say
that's one of the project boroughs for big city butterflies,
it
although
is,
it's not
is it?
in our area, so
Right.
we don't have any direct dealings with them. I mean, we've
Yeah.
had comments being made about good things happening in Stevenage. I
Yep.
know they've had rewilding projects going for quite a long time, and in Hemel Hempstead, Chris Ridley's saying that
Yep.
they've been quite good. And I know I've spoken with the Decorum Council, that is, on various wildflower projects that they're hoping to get going. I know in St Albans, where I live, there's a huge pressure to cut funds at present, but they have recently allocated £100,000 to a wilder St Albans project, which is not cutting verges, is quite a key part of that, and they're employing a project officer who's in the process of being recruited at present to oversee that project. So it seems there's quite a lot going on. I mean, one from what you said, one of the things I wondered whether we're better off aiming at verges that aren't in built-up areas to start with, because there's probably less people are going to complain if it's not outside their house.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting thought. Is that I mean, personally, I think I have the opposite view, is that actually, from my point of view, I want to put people and wildlife together. And I know that's going to be a bumpy road, but actually that for me is probably a more important driver than, I just want engagement of people and wildlife. And that's why I'm really excited about Big City Butterflies, because it's going to kind of, that crash of getting people engaged with wildlife is right there. So I also think that urban wildlife, urban verges, and urban parks are the things that get mauled so much. They just get constantly mown. Where is it? It's in Hackney, London Borough of Hackney. Some of the grasslands in London Borough of Hackney are being mown 22 times a year. That's utterly outrageous. What an utter waste of money that is. Now, they are really keen on moving towards cut and collect and reducing that, and they see the obvious amount of, if they could remove from 22 cuts a year down to 2 cuts a year on a cut and collect, why wouldn't they do that? And so I think for I'd rather go for that sort of head to head of persuading people that this is something they should do in urban areas. In rural areas, absolutely. I think if we can do it, and I'd point you to Lincolnshire, where in the Lincolnshire wolds, those beautiful wide verges, which some of which were already pretty good for wildflowers, where those old drove roads where they used to drive the sheep down from the hills down into the plains, those verges are now on. Most of those are on cut and collect. And that's a joint project with the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust and Lincolnshire County Council, and with local farmers, and with the prospect of some of that material going into biogas production. So Lincolnshire have really gone into that rural verge maintenance for wildflowers, and amazing. They're doing some really good stuff. But I don't know, it's harder, partly because local authorities spend less on rural verge management, so there's in some respects less to save. There may be more to gain because there are fewer complaints, but actually it's that balance. It's also finding the kit. There are a lot of rural verges, and you do end up with a lot of grass, and you've got to do something with it.
And
So
Andrew made the point that we've got a lot of council elections coming up in the next next month or two. I think May, isn't it, that they're on in
Yes, there
Hertfordshire?
are.
I'm not so sure in London, and that would be a great opportunity to be lobbying councillors about it.
Well,
I mean, do you think that's the best route in to lobby councillors rather than going for officials?
Oh, I do. Look, from my point of view, the greatest success I had at Dorset County Council was well, I was an officer there, was access to members. Members are the conduit between, the community who elect them and the officers. If you can get to members to be able to influence, and they're all keen. There aren't many members who are going to turn around and say, no, we don't want to save money. No, we don't want to add wildlife. I mean, what? Those are two big important agendas for most members, and I would have thought this is a fine time to be doing it. And there are mayoral elections in London, of course, this spring. I had a look at the manifestos for some, but I couldn't quote them to you now. Maybe Simon can, but it basically for organisations like TFL. I mean, they are signed up to deliver more biodiversity. So one of my fave clients at the moment are TFL. TFL organised a road verge conference 2 weeks ago to bring people together across the London boroughs and for Connect Plus services in the M25, because they want to see coordination of better management for wildlife across the road verge network in London. That's TFL organised that. That wouldn't have happened 2 or 3 years ago. There's change happening out there, and any way you can encourage elected members to see the benefits, then please do, and encourage them. Your local ones, send them to the link to this talk that I've just given, and get them to contact me.
We certainly will. And we've had one suggestion that a good way to reach people would go on to Springwatch. Isn't Chris Packham supposed to be a vice president of Butterfly Conservation or something? Why aren't you on there saying this?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to be. If anybody can kind of wave that magic wand. I've had not Springwatch so much. Springwatch is carefully guarded, isn't it? Springwatch is relatively formulaic. I think they ought to be doing something on this, but they haven't.
I think I managed to get on there last year without too much trouble.
Top quality.
They phoned you up for a comment on what I was saying. So
they did.
Got your phone number.
They have got my phone number. Look, they haven't done it yet. The only other possibility was the One Show, and I've had 3 attempts at getting on the One Show. Now, some people love the One Show, some people don't. I just saw it as an opportunity, but it hasn't happened yet. But it may yet do. So probably watch this space. But that some of these things are blindingly obvious, and when you walk out onto your nice, I mean, if you walk out onto the Weymouth Relief Road end of May and early June, it's alive with butterflies. I mean, why wouldn't everybody? I mean, I had one dear person from Natural England in tears because she'd never seen so many butterflies since she was a child. I mean, they were marble whites, as they do, flopping around your feet when they're in big numbers. Wonderful, but it is evocative. It does bring back memories, and I think it's important that people, yes, you want to talk to them, but they've also got to see it for themselves. And the more organisations that start doing this, the better.
Right. Cool. Okay, well, look, I think we're probably at time when we ought to stop for the next interval. We'll try and find a way of sharing the comments with you, because there's
what I'm going to do.
Different councils.
Yeah, what I will do is I'll start responding to those comments while the rest of the the afternoon is going on, and I can also copy and paste from that, so I'll hang on to them.
I'll be downloading the log for the meeting, so I can send you the comments as well. Just
brilliant.
to also let you know, Zoe has arrived, so Zoe is now somewhere in the number of all the hello, Zoe. Nice to see you again today.
I know, this is my 3rd Zoom meeting of the day, and it's the last one before I go on holiday.
3rd of the day. Oh, look, I've got 2 today. You've got 3. I did one last night, one the night before. We are in huge demand, that Zoe and I. It's great. Love it. It's just exhausting.
You're getting your messages across. That's the best thing.
That's what we do. Excellent. Well, look, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Malcolm and Liz, for inviting me, and been brilliant to talk to you all. I look forward to seeing some of you at, I do want to come up to Greenwood Park this spring if we're allowed out to play. It'll be and I really look forward to hearing. I mean, is that right? No small blue yet? Is that right?
Sorry, I dropped out for a moment.
Oh, sorry. So no small blue
yeah,
at
thanks
Greenwood.
very much.
Yeah, but anyway, there we go. Well,
No, there isn't.
no, there isn't.
Not yet.
Okay, not yet.
Not-
Well, I really hope it's this year, and congratulations. It's a brilliant site, and it will be good in due course. Okay,